Hey everybody, I wanted to make a video that was actually a recommendation from one of you in my comments from one of the last videos I made. I made a video of my top 10 favorite solo Beatles albums, and that person said, you know, you picked a lot of solo Beatles albums from the 70s. It'd be interesting if you made a list of your top 10 favorite solo Beatles albums from the 80s. So I've done just that. So the requirements are no compilations. So it just has to be a true album, and it has to be from the years 1980 to 1989. So here we go. First things first, number 10. And while some of you may say, well, that's a compilation, it's not. This is considered, in my opinion, a real album here. We've got Paul's Russian album. This is released in 1988, and for me, this was a big album for me when I discovered it. I think I discovered it like in the 90s. I got it on CD. It was so cool to me that Paul recorded this rock and roll album and just released it in Russia. And then the only way we could get it over here was imported as like a bootleg, basically. So he kind of invented his own official bootleg. And this is my introduction to a lot of these early rock and roll songs, like 20 Flight Rock, Lottie Miss Claudie, Bring It On Home to Me, Lucille, Don't Get Around Much Anymore, Summertime, Crackin' Up, Midnight Special. A lot of these songs I'd never heard until I had this album. So always really liked this album a whole lot. Although I do prefer Run Devil Run that he recorded in the late 90s. That's his best rock and roll album in my opinion. But this Russian album is excellent, and my favorite song on here is Don't Get Around Much Anymore, which is excellent. So that's number 10 for my top 80s solo Beatle albums. Number 9, Press to Play. Now this album gets panned almost by everyone online and everyone I talk to. And it's definitely not one of my favorite Paul albums. So as far as the 80s go, to me it's better than Give My Regards to Broad Street. And as you'll see, the ones that made it ahead of this, they are indeed, in my opinion, better. But this one's not bad at all. The production of this is what really does it in. The production's pretty bad. The songs are not bad. Paul doesn't really write bad songs. They're not his most popular songs. They're not some of his best songs, but they're good songs. I really like this first song here, Stranglehold, is really cool. I like the song Press. Angry is really cool. Angry has Pete Townsend and Phil Collins on there. And However Absurd is a really cool song too. So Press to Play is number 9 for me of my top 80s solo Beatle albums. Okay, number 8, George Harrison makes his first appearance. This is the Somewhere in England album from George, and this is a really good album. It has the big song on here, was All Those Years Ago, which of course reunited the three Beatles, Paul and Ringo, and then also Linda McCartney and Denny Laine sang on that song with George, and it's a tribute to John Lennon, of course, who was tragically killed in 1980. So that's what this album is really known for, is that song. And I do love that song. I think it's a fantastic tune. But this one has some other great songs too. Life Itself is a really cool song. I like Teardrops. And I also like Writings on the Wall. Really good song. So it's not one of my favorite George albums, but it's a really good one. And definitely deserves to be in the top 10 in my opinion. So that's Somewhere in England. Okay, number 7. This is right at the beginning of the 80s. We have McCartney 2. To me, this album is a little overhyped. I think just because it's Paul and because it is kind of weird, and he did go a little bit in a different direction than he ever has as far as like a lot of synthesizers and that kind of stuff. It gets a little bit hyped because of that, but it's still a really good album. I love Coming Up. I love Temporary Secretary. I love On the Way. Nobody Knows is great. And One of These Days, also fantastic. But it has a lot of filler. to me, a lot of instrumentals. But the big thing about this album is that apparently coming up inspired John Lennon to come out of retirement and start recording again. And then he went to the studio and did Double Fantasy and Milk and Honey. So that alone makes this album worthy of being in the top 10 for me. I also like the gatefold cover. I've always been a big fan of this, where it's a Linda McCartney photo. I think it's really cool. So that's number 7. Number 6, another Paul album, Tug of War. Another album that, in my opinion, is a little bit overhyped. This was considered like Paul's comeback album, like he was back to having another masterpiece. I think it's a great album, but I definitely think there's a bunch of filler on here for me, and the production's a little bit hard for me to digest sometimes. But I do love a lot of these songs. I love I love the Stevie Wonder song he does, What's That You're Doing. I love the title song, Tug of War. Somebody Who Cares is fantastic. The Pound is Sinking is great. And I also like Dress Me Up as a Robber a whole lot. The ones I'm not too fond of are Ebony and Ivory, just because it was played so much. Here Today is a really beautiful song, and I like it. But again, lately it gets played a whole lot. It seems like Paul is playing it live every show. And he plays it on like talk shows now and stuff too. It's all over the place. It's a really cool song, but I just heard it so much. And then it's got a bunch of filler, like Get It and Be What You See are just like 2 little filler songs. Get It has Carl Perkins on it, which is kind of cool, but anyway, that's my take on Tug of War. Really good album, but definitely not one of my favorite Paul albums at all. But better than McCartney 2 and Press to Play, in my opinion. So that's Tug of War. Let me count backwards here. We got 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Okay, here's 5. We're halfway there. Number 5, Double Fantasy. This album for me, I had the hardest time listening to this album, just knowing it was John's last. So it always had this like bit of sadness over it for me. But recently, in the last couple of years, I've actually been able to listen to it for what it is, just as an album of music from John and Yoko. And I really have learned to appreciate it. And even Yoko's songs. I think this really works as an album. They tried to make it a dialogue between a man and a woman, and they really pulled it off, in my opinion. I love all of John's songs on here. I think he was really coming back into a new phase of his career. Just Like Starting Over is so great. I love Cleanup Time. I'm Losing You is one of my all-time favorite John songs. Beautiful Boy is just perfect. One of his perfect songs. Watching the Wheels is my hands-down favorite song on this album. Woman is a perfect song again. Yeah, and then the Yoko songs on here I like too. I like, let's see, Beautiful Boys. I like Kiss, Kiss, Kiss. You can't deny that that's a really catchy dance song. And Hard Times Are Over is really cool too. So Double Fantasy is a really good album, in my opinion. It won Grammy of the Year. And obviously it won Grammy of the Year probably had a lot to do with the fact that John was killed that year. And so they wanted to give him some kind of award. But this album to me was deserving of it. Probably if you ask anybody, and I was born in 1983, by the way, so I was never alive to witness all the stuff that happened here. Oh, there's an appearance from Bobby. But to me, like if I talk to my parents or other people who were alive at the time, if you say, what's the album of 1980, they would probably say Double Fantasy, just because it was just played all over the place. So anyway, that's my take on Double Fantasy, number 5. Number 4, released in 1989, Flowers in the Dirt. Another album, as maybe this is a continuing theme you can see here, in my opinion, with Paul and his 80s albums. This album, to me, is really overhyped. Yes, I love the co-writes with Elvis Costello. My Brave Face is fantastic. I love Put It There. You Want Her Too is great. Distractions is great. And I even really like, I love this one, and I like Motor of Love. And Don't Be Careless Love. But to me, there are some of the worst Paul songs ever on here. one of those to me is How Many People. It's like this like kind of like reggae attempt by Paul, and it just doesn't fit him at all in my opinion, and I skip it every time. I hardly ever skip any Paul songs, but I definitely skip How Many People. Figure of Eight to me is just kind of a boring tune. It's got a cool riff, but that's about it. Rough Ride is a similar situation. We Got Married to me is just slightly embarrassing, just my opinion, but I just have a hard time with that tune. Anyway, so that's my opinion of Flowers in the Dirt. But the great songs are great. My Brave Face is absolutely a great song. That could have been a Beatles single. It's that good. Motor of Love is so lush and so really, really good. This one, excellent. And like I said, all the Elvis Costello collaboration songs are top notch. So it's that's why it's so high on my list. Is that the great songs are absolutely great. But it was kept from number one for me with the bad songs. So that was number 4. Here is number 3, another McCartney album, and this is one that might surprise a lot of you. Pipes of Peace. In my opinion, this is way better than Tug of War, which is why I have it above Tug of War. I think it's better than Flowers of the Dirt, which is why I have it above Flowers of the Dirt as well. I will also say this is the highest McCartney album on my list. So you can X out, give my regards to Broad Street, and I guess that's it for the McCartney. I have most of McCartney's albums in here right now, but I think Pipes of Peace is a really underrated album. I love the collaborations he does with Michael Jackson on here, and I'm not a big Michael Jackson fan at all, but I think they're really good on here. The song The Man is so good. It's so great. I really like it a whole lot. Let me just make my computer unsleep. Pipes of Peace, the title song, is fantastic. The Other Me is really good. Keep Undercover, so bad, it has an excellent melody. It's like a Smokey Robinson song that was never recorded. The Man, like I said, is great. Suicide Little Show is great. Average Person is fantastic. Hey Hey and Tug of Peace are like kind of like jams he did. Those are a little bit throwaway, but they work on this album. And then Through Our Love is another great tune. So this is a really solid McCartney album for me, and my favorite of the 80s, of his 80s output. So Pipes of Peace, number 3, and produced by George Martin and engineered by Jeff Emmerich, by the way. Don't want to skip them over. Okay, we're down to the last 2. Might be a surprise for all of you. Number 2, Milk and Honey. This is the album that John recorded during the sessions for Double Fantasy. They started immediately recording the follow-up album, which was going to be this. He was never really able to complete the album the way he wanted to, but they released what he had done. And honestly, I think it benefits because of that. Obviously, I would prefer to have John back and not have been killed, but just the way things went, things happen the way they happen, and it's obviously a huge tragedy, and it'll never, ever be okay. But speaking musically, for this album, the fact that you're getting these raw recordings is really, really excellent because he comes through so fantastically well on this album. His songs are so great. I'm Stepping Out is one of my favorite John songs. I Don't Want to Face It is great. Nobody Told Me is probably my favorite John song of the 1980s and maybe even his whole solo career. Nobody Told Me is so good. Borrowed Time is excellent. Forgive Me a Little Flower Princess is so great. Grow Old With Me is just an epic ballad that is so fantastic. I'm stuttering my words, it's so good. And a little side note, seek out the version of Grow Old With Me on the John Lennon Anthology. George Martin did a string score for it, and it's really, really great. So check it out. And Yoko's songs on here are great too. Again, my favorite Yoko song is on here, Let Me Count the Ways. It's a really, really good song. It's a really well-crafted song. So this is really one of my favorite albums of all time. I love Milk and Honey. And it's just such a positive album too. I have to say that. It's such a positive album. It's such an organic album, and I really love the feel of it. So number 2 is Milk and Honey. Number 1, and rightfully so, I would say, this was released in 1987, George Harrison's Cloud 9. This album is perfect. Every single song on here is so good. To me, this is one of the best albums of the 80s by anyone, not just the Beatle people. It had the huge hit song, Got My Mind Set on You, which is a cover, but it's a fantastic song, and the video is perfect. Another hit, When We Was Fab, excellent tune. Just this had so many great songs. This Is Love, a great song. Fish on the Sand, I love that song. Devil's Radio, Someplace Else, Breath Away from Heaven. It's just such a great album. Produced by Jeff Lynne and George Harrison. Guest appearances by Eric Clapton. Ringo's on here. Elton John is on here. It's just such a great album. And every single song, like I said, is great, which is why it's #1 for me. This is the best solo Beatle album of the 1980s. I'm sure a lot of you are saying right now, why, again, have you not put any Ringo albums in here? Well, there's a reason for that. To me, my favorite Ringo albums are, as I said in my last video, my favorite Ringo album is hands down the Ringo album from 1973, I think it was. That's a really good album. I really like it a whole lot. I'll listen to it every once in a while. And then my second favorite album is Ringo's Roto Gavor, I believe is how you say it, where he's got the little monocle on the cover. That's a really fine album as well. And I like Goodnight Vienna. Those are all 70s albums, though. To me, Ringo didn't really have any 80s albums that I really love. There's a few songs I like a whole lot from the 1980s that he did. But as far as 80s albums, I just have a hard time with Ringo for me. That's not to say, though, that I don't have favorite Ringo albums that I would put in my top 10. For example, Vertical Man is a great album that I really like a whole lot from the 90s. So maybe when I make my 90s Beatle solo albums, favorite albums, I will definitely include that album in there. But for now, that's my reasoning for not including Ringo. Other albums that I didn't include were like George Harrison's Gone Tropo album, which is the one released before this. It's a fine record. I enjoy it every once in a while listening to it, but it's definitely not one of my favorites. I'm trying to think of any other albums I left off. Men Love Avenue is a John Lennon album that was released, and to me, it kind of falls under the category of a compilation, but I guess it could be considered an official album, but I still wouldn't have put it in my top 10. It has outtakes from Walls and Bridges and the Rock and Roll Sessions. So it was technically recorded in the 70s, but released in the 80s. That's a little cloudy. Another honorable mention that I wanted to bring up was this album that was almost released in the 1980s. This is Paul McCartney's Cold Cuts album. This is a bootleg, but it was going to get an official release in the 1980s, but instead they released this album, All the Best, which is cool, compilation, really typical greatest hits album. It's got all the usuals, Band on the Run, Jet, all that kind of stuff. This album is a whole another ball game. You get a whole bunch of unreleased songs from the Wings days and from some of his later days as well. This has two of my favorite Paul McCartney songs ever. One is called Cage, which was from the Back to the Egg sessions. It was never released. The other one is called Water Spout, which is from the London Town sessions that was never released. So if this would have been released, this would have been probably my #1 album, but it wasn't, and it's a bootleg, so maybe when I make my top 10 favorite Beatle bootlegs, I will include this. So anyway, that's it for now, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Kind of a long one, but I should have researched this and remembered your screen name, but whoever gave me this idea from the last video in the comments, I really thank you very much, and I appreciate it. And I hope to see some of you make this same video. I'd love to know what your favorite 80s solo Beatle albums are, because it'd be fun to know. Anyway, that's it for now. Also, thank you for putting up with my nighttime filming here. I do have a light down here trying to make it a little bit better, but it's still kind of a blue tint. I like a little pink as well, but oh well, folks. Anyway, that's it for now, and yeah. Keep on watching these videos and collecting your vinyl. George says, do it. Do it, to do it, to do it, to do it, to do it.